the waterways, they had a much larger professional force, and the British had the initiative. So Washington had the dilemma as to what to do, and what he did was to spread his forces fatally out. So about a quarter of his army, 5,000 men, were down there in New York City. Tom, can you scan out a little bit so we see the whole? About half of the army was at the northern part of Manhattan, called Harlem Heights, that you can see. And then about the remaining quarter was strung out on the eastern side of Manhattan, basically centering around point number 2. So Tom, let's go down to point number 2. Point number 2 is Kips Bay. And here at 11 o'clock in the morning of Sunday, September the 15th, the British unleashed a furious attack at Kips Bay, and this was Washington's weakest point. That area is still called Kips Bay in Manhattan, and it's basically at 34th Street at the East River. Washington at this point was up with his main army in Harlem. He heard the fighting, and with his aides de camp, rode down to point number 3, which was a cornfield at the time. And according to true history, Washington and his aides de camp got there, found the men panicked in retreat from Kips Bay, and he was unable to form his troops. According to true history, Washington is led by his aides de camp as British Rangers are approaching General Washington. But here at point number 3, according to the alternative history that I just published this year called The Long Shot, The Secret History of 1776, my alternative history has Washington taking a musket wound to his chest, and you'll have to read the book to find out what could have happened in 1760. Now let's go to dot number 4. We can scan down on that. Dot number 4 was the Murray Mansion, and you can see that depicted on the Johnston map. We can go down a little bit. This area is a fashionable area of Manhattan, still called Murray Hill. And here, British General William Howe rested his troops and took refreshments. And while he paused, let's take a look at point number 5. That allowed the American 5,000 trapped in New York City to make their escape. It says Putnam's retreat, and they were able to escape unscathed to join the rest of the army up in Manhattan. So this was a major missed opportunity for the British. Let's go to dot number 6. And dot number 6 is the Morris Mansion. This still stands today. It's called the Morris Jumel Mansion. And it's a historic site, one of 3 original buildings left from 1776. And this was Washington's headquarters from mid-September to mid-October 1776. Now let's scan over to point number 7, Tom. So this marks the location where the next morning, Monday, September the 16th, the Battle of Harlem Heights took place. So on that morning, the Americans probed the British lines coming down from their fortifications up in Harlem Heights. They crossed the Hollow Way and probed the British at point number 7. Well, each side reinforced one another, and it developed into a full-scale battle. And even though the Americans wound up falling back to their entrenched positions on the heights, the Americans fought bravely and redeemed their honor, which they had lost at the previous day's rout at the Battle of Kips Bay. And the final point that I want to come to is point number 8. This is Fort Washington. This is still a section in Upper Manhattan called Fort Washington. And the outline of the 1776 fort exists today in a park and playground in, again, a fashionable section of Manhattan. Well, here at Fort Washington, 2 months later, this would be the scene of the worst defeat that the British handed to the Americans in the entire war in the North. So, Tom, let's just scan out. So this map shows at once the topography and the terrain of the New York area. It makes you feel that you were there. And it shows also the exquisite detail of battles that nearly ended the American Revolution within 3 months of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So this is just one of my favorite maps. And now in closing, I want to show one other quick map. Tom, we could go to that. So in 1956, Bruce Blyven published a charming small book called The Battle for Manhattan. And this was based on his walks through Manhattan. He was a journalist, and his own research. And the end papers of the book show this really interesting map. So it's an overlay, and in the black outline is Manhattan as it was in 1776. And then the red lines show some of the fill and an overlay of the streets of Manhattan in mid-20th century. And while much of Manhattan's hills have been bulldozed and its marshes filled in, the contour of Manhattan looks remarkably the same. And you can certainly recognize Manhattan as you take walks through it today, and imagine what it was going back 240 some years. And that completes my presentation, and I hope we have time for questions. Thanks for the opportunity.
Ron, thank you.
Thanks, Ron. We have a few questions in the chat, if I could just toss them out there.
Yeah.
Dan
Courtney?
was asking if the maps have been geo-referenced with Rumsey or Google Earth, and then also compliments on stellar cartography.
Courtney, can you hear me? Courtney, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We're at time, actually. We're at time. I'm sorry, but I think we should probably go on, and then when we have time at the end of the whole thing, we'll come back for questions.
Yeah, save the questions. Thank you very much, Ron. Ron has an unbelievable collection, and you can look at it on the digital gallery at your own leisure.